Welcome everyone to Public Spend Forum's Learn the Market series for government professionals. Through this series, we are helping public sector professionals learn about important markets and how to buy from them. My name is Raj Sharma. I'm the Chairman and CEO of Public Spend Forum, and I will be helping guide today's discussion along with our expert panel, Pierre Mitchell and Ash Beatty. Today, our topic is how to buy procurement technology, getting started. As you may know, we just recently hosted a public procurement technology symposium with over 400 government professionals, companies, experts, etc. The response was overwhelming, and people asked us to do a lot more on this topic. Honestly, we were surprised by the level of interest. So with that interest in mind, we're just starting a series of discussions today where you'll hear a lot more about how to buy procurement technology. And we'll try to cover as much as we can in 1 hour, but we'll tell you more about this series as we go. Before we get started, I'd like to offer a big thanks to NIGP for partnering with us on this series. We're working with NIGP on a number of things, and we really appreciate their forward-looking view and commitment to really push the envelope in this and other areas. I know some of our NIGP colleagues are on as well. In terms of logistics, I think Frank McNally just mentioned we would love to hear any questions that you may have, and we will try to answer them if possible. If not, we will get back to you. But please submit questions through the chat bar. We do have 2 people facilitating the online discussion, Yanisa and Frank from our team, so please feel free to do that. And if you have any technical issues, I believe you have their email, as well as you can ask online. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and get started. We have 2 experts that honestly know a lot more about procurement technology than I do. So I'll have them introduce themselves. Pierre and Ash.
A research function over at a company called Azul Partners. We run some websites that are focused on supply chain and procurement. Our largest one is Spend Matters, and it is kind of the largest procurement technology site for the private sector. So we focus on a lot of things around kind of all things procurement tech. So Raj drew me into the session, and we're a partner with the Public Spend Forum, and really happy to share everything that we can about the adoption of procurement technology to improve procurement processes now with the huge effort in the public sector as well. So happy to be here and to make this a good event. Thanks. Ash?
Hi, everybody. This is Ash Beatty. I'm a Managing Director at Public Spend Forum. I work on strategy and research. I work on topics of interest in the public sector, such as workforce competencies, how to measure and manage public procurement performance, and of course, procurement technology, and a variety of other areas. So I do a lot of the research and working with leaders, practitioners across the public sector to really get our arms around some of these topics.
Great. Thank you, Pierre and Ash. So you'll be hearing a lot from all 3 of us, and we really do want to make this a conversation. So we will be you'll just see us go back and forth, and we hope to hear from you as well along the way. So let me, before we jump into the topic, just quickly tell you about Public Spend Forum in case you are not familiar with, if we can go to the next slide. So Public Spend Forum is a best practices and market intelligence platform for public procurement and public sector markets. We are working globally to transform the way governments spend nearly $10 trillion. If you didn't know that number, that's how much governments spend across the world to buy stuff. So we're working with them to help them achieve outcomes more effectively and efficiently by providing them best practices and market intelligence. And we hope ultimately we're all able to work together to help our citizens and constituents. Our platform provides market and supplier intelligence as well as best practices. We're just getting started. We already have what we believe is one of the largest, if not the largest library of public sector focused content in the world. We welcome you to come explore all the content and tell us what else you'd like to see. So, and also you'll find, by the way, this webinar as well as others in this series online as well. So if you'd like to check that out. All right, so let's jump in. I'll hand it over to Ash to walk us through the importance of procurement technology, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of these topics. Ash?
Great, thanks. So this topic, how to buy procurement technology, is such a rich topic. There's so many themes associated with it. And so that's why we've developed this into a series, with this being the first of the series. And so for the next hour, I mean, all we have is an hour today. I wish we had more, but to make them feasible, we're going to break up these webinars into 1 hour chunks. And what we'd like to focus on for this particular hour, for this first in the series of how to buy procurement technology, is really hone in on what are the key considerations in getting started in procurement technology buy. What are all the different things you need to take into account and incorporate as part of that effort. More specifically, we do want to share some insights and specifics with everyone, of course, right, that are more brass tacks and more, get things done oriented. So we thought we'd begin this series also including a discussion around the supplier landscape. So who are the suppliers within procurement technology? What are the different segments? How do these suppliers line up? How do their capabilities vary? So at least to get a general landscape view of the supplier market within procurement tech. And so the focus of this webinar then, we'll begin by talking about the importance and relevance of procurement technology in the public sector. We'll cover, like I mentioned a moment ago, the getting started guidelines. We'll then spend a good amount of our time talking about the supplier landscape and what's happening there. And then in addition to that, as a complement to that actually, we'll discuss this a little bit more toward the end as well. At Public Spend Forum, we're developing an online directory of procurement technology suppliers that can help you, get your arms around who the suppliers are, what they do, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So to begin with, and just to level set ourselves very briefly, why is procurement technology so important in the public sector? So, as we mentioned a moment ago, the governments and public sector organizations across the world spend in excess of $10 trillion globally on buying things, products, and services from suppliers. And so that's just an enormous amount of money that's being spent. Procurement technology is one of the things that's being recognized or rolled over as a key enabler to help spend that money more effectively and more efficiently. Within the U.S. and globally, we're seeing lots of traction, lots of momentum behind procurement technology. As a few examples, within the U.S., the National Association of State Procurement Officials recently did one of their surveys that they do on a regular basis, and 36 of the 47 states responded back with currently using an e-procurement system. It probably sounds strange that I said out of 47 states. All that means is 3 states didn't respond to the survey or didn't make the deadline for the survey. So quite a bit of traction within the state side. Within the U.S. federal government, we're seeing that spending data and procurement technology is gaining in standardization in terms of how data is captured, how it's kept, and ultimately how it's analyzed. At the global level, from the World Bank, they conduct an annual benchmarking public procurement survey. And one of the things that they've identified most recently is that the vast majority of countries across the globe are adopting e-procurement technology. Same thing from an OECD perspective, that's the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. They're seeing broad-based use of digital technologies to support e-procurement activities and innovation across the globe. Obviously, all of this is being done with key outcomes in mind. And so the outcomes are numerous when it comes to what procurement technology can help enable. And so very specifically, just as some examples here, we're talking about improvements in spending visibility, improvements in driving competition and advancing socioeconomic goals, better informing of strategies for doing procurement, for doing sourcing, for conducting buys, as well as identifying savings opportunities. We're seeing procurement tech can help support market research, reduce time in terms of managing the workflow, and really drive toward decreasing errors and manual intensive activities that are low value added can be automated, and so resources can be deployed to much more higher value added activities. These are just some of the examples of some of the benefits from procurement technology and the motivations behind it. And of course, it's probably not a surprise to folks that are listening in that that the momentum is pretty strong and it continues to move forward. If I were to think about some of these key outcomes that procurement technology enables, and I put it in a more relatable context. And so what we're seeing here is, in public procurement in the U.S. in particular, and I think in many parts of the globe elsewhere as well, we think about the procurement lifecycle as having three distinct phases: pre-award, award, and post-award. Pre-award, as you know, is more so the set of planning activities. Award is engaging suppliers with the goal of making an award decision, right? It includes the solicitation, the selection of the suppliers. And then post-award is the ongoing ordering of products and services off of the negotiated agreements, as well as the ongoing management of the supplier relationship and supplier performance, just to name a few things. So if we think about what procurement technology does, in red font on this slide, we've shown across the entire life cycle all the different things or examples of things that procurement technology solutions can help support, can help enable, can help make more efficient, and ultimately more effective as well. So the key point here is that procurement technology cuts across the entire procurement life cycle.
Hey, Nash, just a quick comment on this, Pierre. Yeah, this is one of those interesting areas where certainly there's some sub-processes that are really well suited to technology. Anything that's a lot of workflow processing and kind of high volume types of work that you do. But more and more technology is kind of creeping its way into lots of different processes. So spend analytics to really analyze how much you're spending, on different suppliers and understanding the contracts and all that. It's not just, documenting what's happening, but really driving the workflow and improving it and actually becoming kind of the system that manages, the overall flow, for project management. So not having all these offline, spreadsheets and kind of side systems, really having kind of a single system that just becomes more and more, intelligent over time. And so that you can start it all the way from stakeholders, looking for something to kind of getting it into the procurement cycle very early so that you can engage them. You can do this, analytics. You can see, hey, do I already have suppliers out there that I'm using? So the whole notion of category management is around understanding that category spend that's out there and being able to reuse suppliers that you've used before, particularly strategic ones that are out there, and then being able to engage them in the appropriate method, whether it's open and sealed bidding, real-time bidding events, whether it's reverse auctions or best value, bid optimization. And actually, bid optimization is an interesting area because it actually allows you to do new techniques that you could never even really do before. And that is really about opening up your requirements and letting all the suppliers really bid on whatever they want out of this big market basket, and then figuring out not just the one supplier to choose, but potentially a couple suppliers, and how do we look at the constraints and how much value do we unlock by using this new type of method. But you can't do that because of this apples and oranges comparison problem. So that's just an example of new value that is unlocked through more sophisticated analytics. But on the same side, just making things easier for stakeholders to do some basic buying. So once you've done your contracts, you use what we kind of call guided buying to have like an Amazon-like experience where you can bring together e-marketplaces like Amazon Business, P-cards, requisitioning systems, and kind of into an integrated environment. It's really exciting times right now, and I've been covering this for almost 20 years. So I think the timing is right, really, for everyone to dive into this. So the bottom line is pretty much there's a lot of processes that you can really use technology to manage things more effectively, not just efficiently. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a side train there, but it's really important.
I actually, and if I can just chime in, this is Raj. I just also wanted to just couple one more thing. It's that, I think a lot of what was seen in government, and especially in the beginning, because of the rules and regulations that different organizations, different municipalities have to follow. A lot of the first adoption was really about how to automate and incorporate a lot of those terms and conditions, the policies and regs into contracts, and so in some places we've seen that's kind of where there's been most advancement, but a lot of technologies kind of developed separately, and then you had a lot of these commercial technologies developed. So there is a little bit of a merging going on, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move ahead. So I'll go ahead and actually take this section here. We're just going to share some of our thoughts on some high-level guidelines on how to buy technology. Now, again, we'll acknowledge that this is not a simple topic and something that we'll be spending a lot more time on. But we'll go ahead and get started today just to give you some of our thinking. And again, whenever we say our thinking, it's typically informed by a lot of conversations, a lot of best practices. So based on what we're seeing, we are out there engaging and talking to people about not just what we know, but what else others are doing right there that's working. So for instance, just this morning, I had a conversation with Gary Lambert, who's the Secretary for Operational Services for Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and we talked about this a little bit, and he gave some really good insight. But here's kind of some thoughts that we have. The overall governing philosophy, starting out first, we recommend doing a buy versus build analysis. Too often we see government jumping into development projects when there's a plethora of commercial solutions. And we all know that the commercial solutions are being used by hundreds and sometimes thousands of customers. So there's value in terms of the R&D and investment that these companies are making and working across customers and learning. So before somebody decides to build something internally inside government, we would highly recommend that there must be a buy versus build analysis. Second, really, instead of focusing on requirements and building out very, very detailed requirements documents, which is in the typical approach, not just for procurement technology, but in many areas, it's really important to focus more on the business needs and really the end state of where you're trying to go. So what we recommend is focus on, what is the problem? What are the pain points, right? And what happens if you actually solve those problems? Where do you end up? So you don't need detailed requirements. What you need is a really good vision and need statement that you can give to vendors. Prioritize your critical needs. That's really important. It's not good enough to really know what your needs are and give a whole bucket of, say, whether it's 20 or 100 different things, but it's really critical to think about what's most important and rank order these things, because those are the things that may help you decide then what your evaluation criteria is, what types of solutions you go after. So for instance, if you're doing lots of very large, complex bids around, for instance, the Department of Energy has these very large, complex contracts that are sometimes in the billions of dollars. They will have a very different need than, say, if you're buying a lot of operational goods like furniture, office supplies, other things. So, so really understanding what your needs are, how your business or how your organization operates, and then prioritizing that is very critical to really heading down the right path from a technology standpoint. Also, really ensuring an approach that emphasizes prototyping and pilots before full deployment. So one thing you all may know, the discussion around waterfall approach to technology versus more of the agile approach, and that's really what we would recommend. Is really you definitely need to define what your needs are and understand kind of what issues you're trying to solve for and where you want to end up, but then avoid the monolithic one-size-fits-all approaches, because that's where you get in trouble, where you're trying to solve all problems with one solution. There might be definitely one solution out there, but we would suggest that it's better to prioritize and then decide what are those things that you could go out and prototype and see something that operates live. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we move ahead. but that's really critical rather than spending a year trying to figure out what's going to be that one thing that's going to solve everything. And I'm sure many of the people online, they've seen many of those projects fail. And then, get educated on the pros and cons of SaaS and cloud-based solutions, right? Pierre is going to talk a bit more about that, but that's where the world is going. And what does that mean from a configuration versus customization? And, in the cloud world, you definitely, if you go that route, customizing is not going to be an option many times. But what options, this is where you'll get to see whether, what kind of configuration options are available in a platform that allow you to really implement a platform for your organization. And then contracting oftentimes looks very different. Again, we'll do a webinar just on the contracting portion.
But that's, Raj, that's a good point. I think that's the beauty of some of the SaaS solutions and just some of the modern solutions out there is that you don't have to make this grim choice of, what I need something that's really flexible and configurable now, and then it leads you to a custom solution, and which basically, you're just putting cement shoes on because then, the solution becomes basically unupgradable, and that's the real power of those solutions. But I think just kind of earlier in the life cycle, too, of the project, bringing in a lot of different solution providers and also using whether it's public spend forum or spend matters to kind of just say, hey, here's all these providers out there that can help push through a certain problem that you have, can be really useful. But just kind of open up your problem. Talk about, like Raj said, what are the outcomes? What are the objectives that you're looking for? And then go out to market, do an RFI, get some demos. Whether there's some agencies that'll use different, supplier innovation days or however you do it. A lot of times they're going to bring some new thinking and approaches on how you might tackle a problem. And particularly if you are really low on budget and you need to do something that's more creative and maybe some of the financing, there are some methods, to do that. So never kind of assume what the markets can do. Always let the markets tell you what it can do. So bring in those providers early, learn from them. Of course, they might try to, steer you down a certain approach, but the biggest thing is to learn from lots of these folks. Then once you can kind of, get educated on that, you can match that to your objectives, then kind of go out and get into more formal, RFPs and, solution planning and stuff. So just some quick thoughts there.
Yes, isn't that a great point? And Pierre, I think some of these points, I know that this next slide that's up, there might be some repetitiveness with what both Pierre and I talked about on the previous slide, but this just kind of lays out some steps here. Not everything is sequential here, by the way, so just want to mention that, but we'll just talk about these steps a little bit. And again, we'll dig in an upcoming webinar on much more detail, especially on the whole solicitation and contracting process. But let me just go step by step here really quick. So when you're starting out, there's a typo here, so apologize. It says from the team. Well, it might be from the team, but it's really form the team is what we're trying to say here. So form the team. And that's really important. Just this morning, like I mentioned, I had a conversation with Gary Lambert from Massachusetts. And this is one of the things we talked about, that it's really critical that, when this is not just about technology, it's really not about technology at all. It's really about change. Think about, what you're trying to do. Sometimes there might be people, the changes that you want to implement. There might be people that have done things for, decades at the same way. And so trying to drive a change, this really has to be viewed as a organizational change project as much as anything else. So you have to start out by appointing a project leader who has authority, credibility, and accountability. And can't emphasize that enough, because you can read one of our reports online where we looked at large IT programs. And this was the number one thing, having a weak project leader. It's not necessarily the project leader is weak from a skill standpoint, but they don't have the authority or credibility to actually make decisions. And so people can walk all over them. So this is really important, establishing that. Standing up a team, that has expertise and can engage stakeholders, that's really critical. And then identifying users. A better term might be identifying the customers of the system, right? It could be, your all the different government agencies that you engage with. It could be, the contracting and procurement professionals that are going to be using it. It could be suppliers, right? Identifying them, thinking about how you're going to engage them in this process, that's really important. Now, all of that sounds overwhelming, but at least putting some thought behind this is really critical, and that forms in some way the governance behind this. Second is really, again, something we've talked about already, identify the need. Develop a project vision. What does success look like? There are a couple of very simple questions that I know I ask people to think about every time we talk about a project or any big program. Envision, the end state. What does that look like? And put it in simple language. What are outcomes, that you could speak to? Is it, that the process will have changed so it's very streamlined and we can cut it down from 180 days to 30 days? Is it that, we will, instead of just managing to price every bid, we're going to look at the total cost of ownership, right? Is it we're going to have full visibility in real time and across all our spending? What does that look like? That's really important. And think about the pain points, right? What is it that really kind of every day you come into work or your stakeholders, what pains them, right? That's really important. I would suggest that that's more important than anything else, any requirement that you're going to put in any document. And that's what every vendor that we speak to have asked us, is to emphasize that. And we totally agree that we should not be focused on requirements. We should be really focused on identifying the need and then prioritizing, the point I just made on the previous slide. Prioritize. And there's a reason behind that point being made 3 times, because again, too often we just see these need statements or requirements and everything is equally important. Guess what that means? Then you have no way to differentiate. When you look at all these different solutions, you won't be able to say, well, these guys, this vendor actually does spend analytics and they have, machine learning and artificial intelligence behind some of the ways they're aggregating the data. And that's really critical to us. You want to know whether that's important, or whether, the RFP process is important, or whether the, contract management later on. So really prioritize and then put it all in a simple statement of objectives. The best ones we've seen, we'll share some examples, 2, 3, 4 pages long, especially when you're starting out initially and just, researching and trying to understand what's going on in the market. That's really critical. They have to be very simple, not a 100-page document, not 200 pages, not even 50 pages, and stick to, 3, 4 pages if you can. I'll pause here for a second, see on these first couple of things if our teammates have anything to add there.
Yeah, Raj, this is great. I mean, I think one of the things that is different is kind of like when you talk about develop prototypes, quite often, that is the use of things like agile development and prototyping and kind of and pilots and different things like that is definitely a bit of a change, and it is a change just because some of the cloud-based solutions can kind of get in there and stand up something very quickly. And I think that's really nice, and if you do it well, you can kind of use that to your advantage. So you might be able to say, okay, I really want to get a spend analytics solution, but maybe I don't have a lot of budget. So maybe though I can actually use maybe a sourcing services provider who will provide spend analytics for me as frankly a diagnostic to help kind of go and drive some savings. So I might go through, use the analytics, identify some opportunities, drive some savings, drive some impact, and actually use that then to kind of self-fund some just more pure technology tools down the road. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can try to get some quick value now and then work towards that longer term value. I call it the long-term quick fix. So being able to do something quickly but kind of work towards more of an end goal in mind. So that prototyping piece is a key piece of it.
Yeah, no, and I think we can share examples of others that are doing this. Let me just run through the learn the market piece, and I was just reminded by our people that are monitoring that we're behind schedule in terms of slides, so we better speed it up. So learn the market. Really, once you know your needs, learn the market, right? And learning the market means really try to understand what's happening in technology landscape. Talk to other agencies. You can find out from us who's doing this. You can find out from your peers who's doing this. But learn, right? Some may be doing it better than others, but everybody, I bet, has lessons learned. View lots of product demos, right? That's the only way you really get to see. We will actually be doing a series of demos, so you can join those, or you can have vendors come in. But try to inform and narrow down the choices once you know what your needs are. And then Pierre just spoke about prototypes, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we move along. In terms of then the whole process of solicitation and going through that, we decided that, we will follow up very shortly with another webinar and with some guidance on that, but we didn't feel like we had enough time to really get through and the complexities of that. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and move us to the next section, which I believe Ash is going to kick off for us.
Sure. And since we're a little bit behind schedule, I'll just be very concise here. So this is, we're talking a little bit about the procurement technology supplier landscape now. So what are the different offerings in the market is really the question that's being answered here. And we began by laying it out this way. We've got 16 segments here. This was developed by Spend Matters, Peter and the crew at Spend Matters. And so it's been in use for a very long time. It's reflective of the market, and we thought this is a very good starting point. If we look at this, it looks really clean and neat. It's, like 16 squares with brief descriptions. A lot of these terms I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. E-procurement is in here, e-invoicing, procure to pay, and so on. There's a lot of frameworks out there that are used by the industry to describe these solutions. And so while this is most definitely an extremely helpful starting point, we began with this, but ultimately we want to, again, recast this or cast this in the context of the procurement lifecycle and along the phases of the lifecycle that's familiar within public procurement, pre-award, award, post-award. So ultimately we took this as a starting point and we're going to regroup it. But before I do, I want to see if there's any other comments from Pierre and Raj before I move on.
No, go ahead, Raj. I mean, Ash, I think it's fine. I think one of the key things to note is that there are some core process kind of solutions in here. So we kind of look at it like source to pay, which then unpacks into sourcing and supplier management, and then procure to pay, and then which unpacks into e-procurement, and then there's the e-invoicing piece if you really want to look at through the payment side of the equation, which is increasingly important. And then there's some enabling stuff that really goes across all this data and content management and master data management. There is the analytics that kind of sits on top. There are supplier networks, that are out there, and market intelligence, systems that kind of wrap around your system and provide, insights into it. So, I guess there's a process-oriented piece to it, and then there's an enabling aspect that kind of goes across all these processes, which I think you'll show here on the next slide.
All right, so Pierre has set us up very nicely for the next 10 slides, if I count correctly, but here we go. So we took these 16 pieces and we wanted to, map it to what we've seen a few slides ago, right? Pre-award, award, post-award. So effectively what I've done is we've taken the 16 segments, the very well-defined segments that we saw previously, and we basically put them into, number one here is planning and research. So that's everything you're going to be doing before you actually go out and do the solicitation and select suppliers. So that maps nicely to the pre-award phase. So it's all about basically doing your analysis on your spend, understanding the market, informing your strategy, and really trying to understand what are your goals, what are the solutions out there, and what might make best for you, what might work best for you as you move into solicitation. So that's item number one, planning and research. Item number two is we bundled the award and the day-to-day ordering post-award. We bundled those two things together in item number two, and we called it solicitation and award. So it's about engaging the supply market, doing the sourcing, doing the auctions, putting in place a contract, and then managing day-to-day procurement. So that's number two here. And by the way, we're going to cover each one of these four individually, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. Number three is all the stuff that happens in regards to managing the supplier performance. It ties up to implement and manage performance. Number 4 is the set of their providers, suppliers rather, that provide all of the above, items 1, 2, and 3. And this numbering, just to really reinforce the point, this numbering is really about the suppliers that are out there. What do they offer, and how can we group them into logical buckets? So if it helps, here's a smaller, more condensed cut. You'll notice that, if you dig into each one of these, they've got subtopics, subsegments underneath them. And each one of these 4 areas we're going to be covering individually as we move forward. But before we do, I thought it might be useful to pause for a moment and talk a little bit about software as a service.
Ash, if I could just chime in on the previous slide. I think, from a public sector standpoint on the previous slide, there are many solutions that are, more and more fully integrated. But again, I would emphasize the point that there's also room for best of breed solutions, even as you think about, full suite, kind of these larger solutions, because it goes back again to what's most important to your organization, right? And there are a lot of best of breed solutions. And now that they're cloud-based solutions, the cost of implementing them is much, much lower than it ever was. So there is room for picking, say, multiple solutions if that's what your organization requires.
Thanks, Raj. I'll just kind of touch on these. Yeah, as Raj said, there's going to be a follow-on webcast on this, but I think it's just important to, a lot of times these words have different meanings to different folks. And so if we talk about cloud applications and or software as a service, just a couple of quick, notes on this that's important. So when we're talking about this, what we're talking about is not just applications that are just hosted on servers outside of the firewall, outside of your data center and rented to you as a service. Right, because you could say, hey, this, mainframes or that, right? No, what's different about this is that we're talking about applications that have been architected to have what's called a multi-tenant data model. What that means is these multi-tenant applications are basically like a single virtual application that you can run across, multiple customers, but the data itself still can be kind of virtually or physically partitioned. So, for example, like the Patriot Act or other types of regulations where you need to physically control the data and have it on secure servers, at level X of kind of, data security, et cetera. That's kind of a pure cloud architecture, is that ability to kind of get that scalability of a single kind of app that can then be upgraded very frequently, let's say monthly or every couple of months, as based on what's out there, for most of the solutions. And that lets you basically get all this innovation that's happening across multiple customers into that solution, and you're not locked down into that hard-coded system that you thought was going to be kind of that nice, quick fix. The other thing is kind of the fact that by doing this, you're using a provider that is running on world-class infrastructure and security, whether it's Amazon Web Services or IBM or Microsoft. Really strong infrastructure, and the fact that those data centers are going to be run usually a lot better than you'll be able to run within your own local, agency, and it's just going to be less risky, and it's going to be just managed much more, rigorously. Encryption at rest, all that kind of stuff. The other thing is obviously, since that software, as I was saying, is a frequency upgradable, it also has to be very configurable. And what that means is what previously was a customization can now be configured. The terminology, the look and feel, the extensions, all these things, it makes it almost like it is a custom app, but it's not. It's configured. And what's nice about that is that you can kind of, like, Lego building blocks, you can kind of have these things work together more easily. And part of that is openness, APIs, which is application program interfaces, and more the fact that these apps are becoming intelligent. In other words, just like Facebook is watching you use the systems, a lot of these cloud systems are looking at how do we optimize the user experience, and where can we learn from let's say, the 500 companies that are using a cloud app. Let's learn from that install base as to where people are getting stuck, how they're getting better use of it, and things like that. And then so that's all great, right? This is terrific. The challenge is, though, as you contract with these, you're basically, you're not buying the software, you're renting the software. And sometimes you may not even own the data. You have to make sure that you are contracting with these providers in a way that you are mitigating some of the inherent risks of going with a SaaS model. So how do you get the data back out of the system if you are going to cancel the agreement? There's just a whole set of contractual issues that we can't get into, and we'll cover on a subsequent webcast. And then finally, the last thing that's important is that software as a service is just one as a service model. It can be used as part of other commercial models. So using a managed service provider in a certain spend category, or using this freemium model where you get some capabilities just kind of free out of the box, but it may not be free. It might be either something that's charged to the suppliers or something where you get limited functionality. So you have to kind of go eyes wide open around these models, but they do offer a lot of benefits. You just have to be able to know how that works and how to best contract for it. But that said, it's a different world, and it's generally a pretty good news story for procurement organizations out there. So with that, I'll wrap up.
Okay, great. One quick thing back over here when we were talking about the four broad segments for procurement technology. We've actually gone through the supply market and looked at all the suppliers out there. We identified, over 1,000 suppliers, but then we wanted to hone in on those that were relevant from a public sector standpoint. And by relevant, I mean, number one, either they're already serving the public sector, or number two, they have an orientation to do so. So as we go through this, we'll talk about each one of these four areas individually now. And we'll talk about, how many suppliers we identified here, which, by the way, each one of these four areas that we cover, the suppliers in these four areas in particular, you'll find them in our online supplier directory, which we'll talk about at the very end as well. But I thought I'd just tee that up right now. So to begin with, the first of four areas, planning and research. Digging into it a little bit, you've got things like analytics and market intelligence, software and solutions in here, as well as supplier network and platforms. So as a lot of you already know, analytics and market intelligence is really about understanding your spend enterprise-wide, conducting procurement analytics so that you can identify opportunities and inform your sourcing and procurement strategies. It helps with doing market research and cost analyses, things like that. Supplier networks and platforms, helping to identify suppliers, provide insights into different suppliers. And by the way, now we're talking about just doing procurement in general, right? So if you buy this piece of procurement tech capability, this is what it enables you to do. Down on the bottom, and we'll do this for each of the four areas, right? Not just the first one. Down on the bottom, since we were talking about different ways of buying, including SaaS, including the more traditional license-based approaches, which means you deploy the software on your premises and you run it internally, we thought it was useful for each of these four segments to basically break down how many of the suppliers we see doing what. And so here we're seeing like a pretty significant percentage of the suppliers out of the total as having these SaaS-based solutions, be it only software as a service or an option of buying SaaS versus the more traditional licensing approach, and so on. And so in this particular segment, we've identified 106 suppliers that you can dig into once you hop onto the online directory and see how they're profiled. Raj, Pierre, any comments?
No, I think that was good. Good, Ash.
I think I'll just mention. I just saw a comment. Sorry, we're trying to keep up with some of the comments and questions that are coming in, but it was something related to Agile and SaaS, kind of reconciling the two thinking. I just want to clarify that I think I was specifically referring to the mindset of prototyping and creating prototypes and bake-offs and Agile. So definitely Agile is more applicable to custom development. So just to clarify that point versus buying SaaS solutions. Let me cover this slide here. So here on each one of these sections, we've provided just some examples under each section of potential companies. Now there's a lot more, as you can see here, and we'll continue to improve our supplier directory, and we're asking suppliers to kind of validate some of the information we put in there. But here's some examples. So first couple are really focused on and they're referenced in here from a spend analytics standpoint, even though Zycus is also a full suite, but it's legacy and starting point. For instance, Zycus was in as a artificial intelligence-based auto classification system, where really it used a lot more advanced technologies to AI to classify spend data. I actually worked with them a while back, for instance, on taking a lot of defense data from multiple systems and then classifying it into buckets that you could analyze from a spend standpoint and purchasing standpoint. So, so depending on what you're looking at in terms of what your needs are for spend management and spend analysis, there are a number of solutions out there. You'll see there's another one we highlight later under a different section called Tammer, and I think Pierre can probably speak to them. But their ability to use machine learning and AI to bring really data from multiple sources together. And then we've highlighted Amazon Business here. You might have heard of Amazon Business signing a recent contract with U.S. communities to really help deliver a better buying experience for more of the common goods that you see, where they're bringing really the suppliers on board as well as their catalogs on board and streamlining the purchasing process. Now, could that be coupled with other sourcing systems? Potentially, but again, just wanted to highlight here a couple of different solutions under this bucket that we're seeing that are somewhat prevalent and out there.
The second major bucket that we talk about is solicitation and award. And in this particular mega category, we've got about 152 suppliers that we've analyzed and profiled. And again, those are with relevance to the public sector. These numbers and these supplier numbers are all they're all based on identifying the suppliers that we thought were relevant to the public sector in some way. This is a big mega category. It breaks down into several subcategories, such as sourcing and procurement, contract lifecycle management, procure to pay, more specialized modules like services procurement specifically, which facilitates digital sourcing, buying, paying individuals like freelancers and contractors, and e-invoicing. And again, a similar breakdown at the very bottom. This particular category is much more prevalent from a SaaS standpoint than the first one was that we looked at. Raj, Pierre, I know we're running a little bit tight, so I'm being very streamlined in my comments as I go through each of these four areas. Any comments from you guys?
No, I think that's good. Well, I was going to say, sorry. I was going to say, this is not, everything is not perfectly clean in the market. Sometimes vendors will use different names to differentiate themselves. And other times you might not find a solution provider that's going to offer all capabilities. So for example, the area around services procurement, particularly around contingent workforce management and these, some call them vendor management systems that you use for contingent labor, is not supported very well through a lot of the platforms that are out there right now. So sometimes you might have to kind of, mix and match and get a few solutions until the market, really gets good enough to maybe support your diverse needs that you might have. So it's not always going to fit perfectly, but it's a good start. Sorry, Raj, I cut you off.
But yeah, and I think that's a good one to pick there, Pierre, because I think that's a good example where we know more and more of the spending makeup is going towards services, and that's an area that a lot of organizations, including private sector, struggle with, and so we're seeing several of these marketplaces pop up where you can buy services where you may be contracting for individuals or freelancers or others through your own process, but now you can go to a marketplace and you might get better deals and actually find more expertise, right? So you can see in that instance, right, if that's important to you and you have a full suite already or a full solution that addresses other aspects of your procurement process, there's still room, I want to emphasize, for niche solutions out there, right? And it is much easier to do that now than if you had to, for instance, back in the day, do the client-server model and implement everything in-house. With that, I think, Ash, if we go to the next slide, on the next slide, there are again some examples. Again, as Ash emphasized, this is really a lot of these solutions enable the entire strategic sourcing process, for instance, from everything from spend analysis to market analysis to category strategy development, as well as doing RFPs. solicitation development to bid collection and bid evaluation, and some of the more complex things that Pierre highlighted earlier. A couple of things I just point out as you look at some of these companies here, many of them, some may be much more government-centric and really have built their businesses around government. So, for instance, CompuSearch is more federal government, not in state local, but they have really built a platform with the federal regulations kind of built in. But do they have the more of the sourcing and other capabilities within those? They're trying to build those out, but that would be something you'd look at, right? And vice versa, if you look at some of the other providers, they're starting to incorporate some of the regulations, but they're much stronger at the entire sourcing process and those tools. So you have to kind of understand where some of these different classifications or different vendors come from. I'd just say one last point on this is the differentiation as you're looking at it. Some of the differentiation might be in terms of some of the advanced capabilities, like the ones Pierre highlighted: bid optimization, evaluation, etc. Category specific strengths, right? Sometimes you'll see some of these platforms offer you expertise in different categories, and they'll actually bring you more templates and things for services buying, for instance, or for more complex goods, manufactured goods, and then the integration with government regulations. That's another thing that I just mentioned.
Okay, so the third major category, as it maps to the procurement lifecycle, ongoing management. This is all the post-award stuff. So we have 5 or 6 different breakdowns in here, including ERP suites, supply chain, supply risk management, supplier lifecycle management, cost management. So you can see it gets pretty robust, pretty rigorous as we go deep into this. And so we've got 174 suppliers that we've grouped into this bucket as being focused with ongoing management activities. Once again, we're seeing 91% of providers offering a SaaS-type model. Not exclusively, but 91% collectively.
Hey, Ash, just a quick comment here. So this is, again, a perfect example of where there's not one size fits all, right? So most likely, everybody has an ERP kind of back end that they're using. And it's a question of, what is it that you're going to retain in the ERP, and what are the things that you are going to use in a third-party solution that you can, wrap around it. There are a lot of different options that you can have in using the different solutions, and what are you going to retain versus what do you use a third party for. So, you have to think through kind of, we call it, the architectural strategy around how you mix and match, rather than just trying to find the one system that does it all, because there is no one system that's going to do it all. So.
Here are a couple of things, a couple of examples I want to highlight. Of course, many of you are familiar with Dun & Bradstreet, which may help you at the front of the sourcing process, right, in terms of your vendor management and your supplier directory, where it pulls in other information based on the DUNS number, but then it also helps you kind of monitor risk, for instance, over time for your supply base. State of Flux is a company based out of the UK. That's maybe one of the best companies at supplier relationship management, and they have a set of tools and capabilities. We actually visited, some of their offices, and pretty impressed with some of the work they're doing around supplier relationship management. But again, they're a niche capability. Tammer, it also brings in kind of more of the spend analysis capabilities, but also, and they're probably more differentiated along the lines of, forward-looking strategies, where you can look at, things like what are your drivers of activity for future procurement and future buying behavior, and so you can look ahead and really try to drive kind of more forward thinking. So you can see here in this category, this is really more about ongoing management and how do you improve. And there are, definitely, especially some niche capabilities that you can bring in to think about, how do you really improve the way you manage your spending.
Right. So you could say, hey, well, gosh, these are three different very providers. One is really almost like data as a service, Dun & Bradstreet, and then you have kind of some, consulting and expertise as a service, in State of Flux, and then you have the analytics, as a service with Tamer, and it's really interesting because providers from lots of different areas are kind of converging into the technology, process. So let's say D&B offering up a D&B, company check embedded right into your, supplier onboarding and certification, process, or State of Flux pumping in some certain insights, around suppliers in your supplier management process. So it's a really interesting convergence. Technology is a very word that can encapsulate a lot of different, let's say, legacy models that are out there that are all kind of converging into managing your process better. So this is a great example of three different, models converging into the technology area.
So the fourth major bucket was full suite, covering the entire procurement lifecycle. And here we've got broad-based providers that do a variety of different things, multiple things. For example, from sourcing on to supplier management, as an example, from source to pay, meaning helping with the solicitation of bidding and managing the automation of the order processing. And you get the idea. So these are more broad-based providers that would fall into this category. Once again, we see like a heavy emphasis on software as a solution. There are other, you can still buy perpetual licenses, of course, but things are very much moving toward the cloud. And, one of the big themes that I think we've covered up to this point has been the modular nature of some of these solutions. It doesn't matter what you already have in place. You may already have a procurement technology solution in place. You may have an ERP solution in place, right? But where are you now, and what capabilities and gaps are you trying to fill? And so the options are very, very flexible, and you can hone in on best-of-breed providers, providers that provide multiple modules, all depending upon what your objectives are, what your goals are, and even where you are right now in terms of your technology deployment. That's the amazing thing about the procurement technology landscape today, I think. One of the amazing things.
So Ash, I think just quickly in the interest of time, I'll just say one thing here that, again, that's come up in a lot of our conversations. Many of these are full suite providers, right? They'll kind of promise you soup to nuts. I think you want to check all of these solutions for that. And again, understand kind of what your most critical needs are and how strong they are on those. But also then, one of the things we'd recommend, it doesn't mean that you have to implement, even if you selected one of these types of vendors, right? Full suite, there's a lot of them. Even if you ended up going down the route, you can start small, right? Goes back to the prototyping. You can start small. You can say, okay, we're going to start with a spend analysis capability first because that's going to change the way we think about data and where the opportunities are and all of that. So you can't, I think that you'll hear that from many of the government leaders that are doing this really well. You can't do all of it at the same time because it's a massive change or you're going to fail pretty much guaranteed. So start small from that standpoint, even if you go kind of the full suite. I think I'll close this out by just saying, if you'd like to see the supplier directory, just email us. We'll be bringing it on live shortly, but we do have a report that starts to highlight many of these vendors so that you can download the report on our site. We're actually updating and putting a new version 2 up by end of today, so you can download it. We would just say, make a note and download it tonight. You can get it right now if you like. But if you go back to the previous slide, Ash, the supplier directory really will allow you to look at vendors based on different set of capabilities, and you can filter them and say, okay, what is the market set out there? And definitely contact us if you need any kind of help in kind of navigating some of this information. So I think this brings us to the end. Sorry, we were a little rushed at the end. As you can tell, this is extremely complex area. But while we say that, it's doable. There's again, we encourage the part about learn the market, go talk to others. That's how you can make it much simpler and take some of the mystery out. We do have a next webinar coming up where we're actually going to bring some suppliers together and talk about their advice and what they've seen in some of the RFPs that come out, and then we'll use some examples there to highlight how you can improve kind of going to market. And then we'll announce another one coming up in January that's more about specifically covering the contracting process and how do you really contract for some of these services or solutions. So thank you so much. We're right at 3 o'clock Eastern, and we hope that this was informative. We would love to hear more about what you'd like to find out. We know this is not perfect information and we'll continue to improve, but we're trying to actually follow the whole agile philosophy that, put information out, get information, get feedback. And so tell us if you have any feedback and what else you'd like to learn. Thank you.